So it's like a trip. It's three birds with one stone. It's ban all over again, but it gets the job done.
Ladies, gentlemen, and those with the good sense to do away with the whole notion, I welcome you to the premier audio medium for all your Fazbear entertainment needs. The Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. Note, FFPP is not responsible for any loss of appetite, disinterest, dismemberment, or other legally classified statuses. So strap in and enjoy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. I'm your host with the toast, Rytos, here to do a FNAF podcast. And this is the first time in like a month I don't have a guest, and that's completely my fault. I'm bad at scheduling things. But you know what? It's fine. It's been a while since we've actually had some one-on-one time, some time to just focus in, really narrow down on FNAF lore and questions and Spotify stuff. So this is a good catch-up stream, and I'm saying that to convince myself this isn't just a big mistake by me from forgetting to get a guest for today's episode, but that's fine. Regardless, we are here to talk about FNAF, as we always do. And since this might be the first time for a while that I don't have a guest, I thought today would be a good chance to kind of go over the timeline I've been working on for the main channel, where I'm at, kind of a checkpoint, if you will, what we still have yet to do, what my current hangups are, kind of my thought process behind it, give you a little peek behind the curtain as to what I've been cooking up as it would be. And I'm also, I changed it. If it sounds dramatically better or worse or the same, the voice quality of today's episode specifically, if the vocal quality is better or worse or the same, let me know, because I've been fucking around with the settings and stuff, trying to really make the audio sound as good as it can be. And, well, I don't know if it sounds good or not. I kind of settled on this where the gain is a bit lower, but I'm talking louder. And I'm hoping that with projecting and talking louder, but having the gain lower, it'll sound better overall. So if this sounds dramatically worse, let me know. It won't sound like this again if so. But if it sounds even a little bit better, let me know. Or realistically, like 90% of you will be like, Riley, you're crazy. It sounds the same. And honestly, if it sounds the same, that's fine. As long as it doesn't sound worse, I guess. But going into today's topic, how is the FNAF timeline coming along? And generally pretty good. We're at like kind of the halfway point, I would say, right? So as far as what we've done so far, we've really collected the first half of the timeline, the old games story, I guess, if you want to put it that way, the Scott games half of the timeline. And I like where it's coming so far. And I like how it's coming along, like the idea of William as the master manipulator. And a lot of the driving force of the timeline being William manipulating those around him. Some of the examples, and this is going to be a big recap on the past 2 months worth of videos, so keep that in mind. But one of the examples for that being William getting Henry to help him with the sister location experiments. So in one of my previous videos, I mentioned that I was thinking of, in the Silver Eyes novels, Henry, in the face of loss, creates something. He loses Charlie, he creates the Charlie bots. And one of those Charlie bots eventually is turned into Circus Baby in the novels. So we have corollaries with Henry loses something, he builds something, William uses it. We have that idea. So I was thinking about the sister location animatronics and how, yes, the fun times are stated to be creations of William Afton. William Afton has in the past taken something Henry has made, put his name on it, and called it his own. The illusion discs are a perfect example of that. The illusion discs are part of the Charlie Bot thing. They find the same chips, but without the Afton Robotics stamp. Then suddenly, Afton started using them and put his name on it. I could see something like that similar to the Fun Times. So at least in the games, right? The books are a different continuity, the Silver Eyes specifically, but the games do present this idea of these are incredibly advanced technological wonders, these sister location animatronics. How did William make them? So I was under the impression of okay, I don't think Henry would have participated in killing children or kidnapping children. But I could see Henry being manipulated into creating the sister location animatronics if he'd been essentially sufficiently lied to. So the idea was, well, we know William Afton killed Charlotte Emily. That is a known fact. the reason behind it has always been needed to be speculated. Is it a random killing? Is it because he's jealous of Henry? Is it out of rage for the death of the crying child? It's hard to tell. We don't have a good answer for it. Well, we have good answers for it. We don't have a definitive answer for it. I took the approach, and I really like this explanation, that William wanted, so this is after Crying Child dies. This is Crying Child dies first. And I think Crying Child dying first of the four, like Crying Child, Elizabeth, Charlie, Missing Child incident, I think Crying Child being the first does make the most sense on the face of it. And I've argued different orders before, and even when I've argued those, I've prefaced it with, hey, I do agree Crying Child first makes the most sense, because again, it requires the least amount of prerequisites. The Crying Child dying is just a freak accident, right? So no one needs to purposely do it. We don't need fun times to have been created. We don't need specific setups. It can be a freak accident that can happen for no reason. And because of that, it can happen first pretty easily. So if the crying child dies first, I think William Afton immediately goes into trying to figure out how to put him back together, how to bring him back. And he wants to maybe experiment with how he died in the first place. So he wants to recreate those scenarios in a way that he can study what happens immediately afterwards, especially if, like, we know, right? We know from Alone Together and from several other instances that spirits in FNAF can affect the memories and dreams of those they know. And we know for a fact, nearly for a fact, that the crying child reaches out to Michael throughout the game series. It's me, right? The idea of the crying child trying to get Michael to be like, hey, it's me, do you recognize me? That makes a lot of sense. So if he was doing that to Michael Afton, was he doing that to William Afton? And if William Afton had any inclination that the crying child's spirit was still around and alive and able to be interacted with, well, I guess not alive, but you know what I mean, was around and able to be interacted with, I could see William trying to pursue that and see, like, okay, can I get you to possess something lifelike enough that I essentially bring you back from the dead? So all of that to say, the crying child dying into sister location animatronics, that makes sense. But William Afton being able to create the sister location animatronics was always a stretch. But then why would Henry? So that's where I go to William manipulating Henry by killing Charlotte Emily, right? And I go over this in my Henry video. I could totally see William Afton, manipulator, maniacal, crazy person, going, okay, I need Henry to help me build these so I can experiment to try to bring my son back. But it's a big ask, especially if he finds out they're going to be used on live kids. So one, lie to him, ensure that they will not be tested on live kids. They will be, but just lie to Henry. Second, Henry needs good motivation to make this happen. Because if he just asks him, there's a good chance he says, hell no, I'm not helping you, this is crazy. But if there's a chance it could bring his own daughter back, if she were to die, suddenly Henry has just as much motivation as William. So William killing Charlotte specifically to help manipulate Henry into building the sister location experiment rooms and stuff like that makes a lot of sense to me. And I don't think Henry would be participating in capturing children, killing them, experimenting with Remnant, but I think he would lay the groundwork for William to do so. And maybe once he finds out what they're really going to be used for, he drops out, who knows? But maybe it's Elizabeth's death that like snaps him out of it and he's like, oh, this is wrong. I could see that too. But I really like that idea of William manipulating Henry with the death of Charlie to build the sister location animatronics. I think that's a really fun take in the timeline that I'm not saying I'm the first one to think of it, not at all. I'm sure other people have thought of it. I haven't seen it put into a timeline, so I'm really excited to see how that works out. And then carrying on the idea of William being this master manipulator is Michael Afton. And Michael Afton slotting into this role is nothing new. I'm kind of late to that train, especially after the FNAF movie. It just never clicked with me, where like in the FNAF movie, Vanessa, who is William's child, is hesitantly working for William. Like she does what William wants her to, and it seems like she doesn't want to, but she's terrified of William Afton. And I was thinking about that combining it with what we know about Sister Location, where we have direct confirmation that Michael did all of Sister Location because William asked him to, which is an insane thing to ask for. Like, hey, you're putting your life at risk. Sure, it might bring your sister back, but you need like solid motivation. And that solid motivation seems like it is just William manipulating Michael. So I think that's a pretty easy sell. And like I said, I'm not the first to think of it. I know She's Always Nervous released a video on it. I know a lot of people have talked about the idea of Michael being manipulated. Again, I'm not at all the first person by a long shot to suggest that Michael was being manipulated by William, similar to how we see Vanessa in the FNAF movie. I did extend it. Again, not saying like I extend it, but like I then went to extend it to the FNAF 4 Nightmare Chambers. So to catch people up on there, in Didophobia, one of the Tales from the Pizzaplex stories, we get a story about a kid named Rory who was kidnapped and essentially put into testing chambers that exactly replicate the FNAF 4 gameplay. Now, in the real world, they are barren chambers with like mannequins on sticks, and like it wouldn't fool anybody. But the chamber is constantly filled with hallucinogenic gas. So he's always in this like lucid, not sure what's going on state. And to him, everything is very real. To him, his life is have nightmares for like 6 hours about these animatronics, wake up, go to school, but you can't find your mom anywhere. So you go to get a snack and you pull some food out of the fridge and you eat it. And you're like, okay, I got to figure out where mom is so I can go to school. You wander around your house and you're like, man, I'm tired. I'm just going to go to bed. Forget it. And then you go to bed and you have nightmares again. So you like hazily walk around during the day and you have nightmares at night. And that was his entire life for like 10 years because the whole facility was abandoned and it was just running automatically. And we learned that it's hallucinogenic gas making him believe this, and that he was being experimented on to learn more about like fear and how it affects hallucinogenic gas and what people do if they are in a constant state of fear. It was a whole weird, messed up experiment, and it was connected to the Sister Location bunker, like directly connect. So that kind of raises the question of, okay, well, in Sister Location, the video game, we see those monitors that show us like FNAF 4 rooms, and we see on the Fuse map, it's connected to a FNAF 4 map. So is the FNAF 4 game experiments or is it nightmares? What is it? I've been saying, and I know it's kind of a hot take a little bit, I'm not the only one saying this, but I've been saying that, let me just, I keep qualifying. If I ever say, and I think, know that I'm not saying that I'm the first person to come up with something. Sometimes that happens, sure. But like, I'm sure every theory has already been said. It's how you organize them. So I'm not trying to take credit for any one theory. Just put it out there, okay? But as far as FNAF 4 goes, I've been saying, especially after the Character Encyclopedia and Didophobia both came out, right? The Character Encyclopedia directly states FNAF 4 is the nightmares of the crying child after going to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. That is the direct statement from the Character Encyclopedia. FNAF 4 is the crying child having nightmares because of the mascots at Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. But I was always still like, okay, well, what about the FNAF 1 phone call? FNAF 4 has an Easter egg where you very often can hear a FNAF 1 phone call played backwards in one of the nights. And then there's the whole idea of the FNAF 4 gameplay pretty much being the same exact layout of FNAF 1, right? So that's two connections to FNAF 1. So I was like, okay, it really seems like Michael is the one having these nightmares. So what is going on? So, and then again, or is this all testing chambers like Sister Location and Didophobia are suggesting? So I went, okay, what if it's all? What if it is all of the above? Where the FNAF 4 gameplay that we are specifically seeing, I'm just going to say it there, I'm just going to say it straight, and we'll explain it. Okay, so hold on. The FNAF 4 gameplay are nightmares that Michael Afton has because of the PTSD from going through the Nightmare Chamber experiments that are currently being affected by the spirit of the crying child. Okay, let's roll that back. What the fuck did any of that mean? So the idea is that William Afton does build these nightmare test chambers, and perhaps he builds them after the crying child as his beginnings of figuring out how everything is supposed to work, and if there's any way to bring back the crying child. So, if he has those built, I think a logical step in William Afton's messed up mind is I need a test subject. I need someone no one will think to check up on, someone who I'm okay with torturing, and someone who is a child. And Michael Afton fits that bill, right? William is like, well, he's my kid, so as long as I don't report to the police that he's missing, there's a good chance that I can get away with it for a while. And I get to experiment on someone of a similar age and similar genomes, and I get to have my petty revenge on my son for causing the death of my youngest son. So it's like a trip. It's 3 birds with 1 stone. It's ban all over again, but it gets the job done. So William puts Michael in those nightmare test chambers, and he's stuck there for who knows how long, a couple years maybe. And then anytime William needs somebody to do something for him, he's got a teenager or at some point an adult who's literally stuck in a never-ending nightmare loop that he can stop at any time. And if you're Michael Afton and you're in this nightmare loop that goes on forever, and one day it stops, and your father shows up and he says, hey, I found a way to save you. You just need to do one thing for me and you can stay out of here. You're going to do whatever that is. So that's where I kind of went into Michael Afton is Fritz Smith and Mike Schmidt, because he is going, and alive still, because he is going to these locations to do William's bidding, specifically to try to get pieces of those animatronics, at this point, post Missing Child incident, to study them and study how their spirits are working, if there's any, and this is like when he starts learning about Remnant, to like try to get solid information. But Michael Afton is really bad at doing that. He's never done it before. So this is, and it's kind of funny, I think canonically, the only skill Michael Afton has is playing FNAF games or like surviving in a FNAF type scenario, right? Think about it. His entire teenage to adult life, he is trapped in FNAF 4, and all he is ever allowed to do is FNAF 4. So when his father pulls him out and he's like, okay, get a job at FNAF 2, go get some animatronic parts for me and come back. And then Michael goes there, and he is an expert at surviving against these animatronics who are trying to kill him because they think he's William Afton or he's just an adult and they don't trust him. He is an expert and never gets caught by these animatronics. However, he's really bad at like subtly going to them during the daytime and taking an arm off. So he gets fired for tampering with the animatronics. And you know, he either stinks because he didn't shower beforehand, or these suits do canonically reek. They smell terrible. They are matted and sticky. So if he's messing with them, it could probably rub off on him. And the same thing with FNAF 1, right? He goes to FNAF 1 for an entire week and he survives for the entire week because he's so good at that. But he's terrible at actually like messing with the animatronics without getting caught. So he gets fired again. I think it's really funny that canonically, I think canonically in this timeline, Michael Afton is like a FNAF god and shit at everything else. I think that lines up really well with the evidence we have, and I think it's kind of funny. So, that being said, FNAF 4, is it Michael in those chambers? No. I think FNAF 4 is the nightmares he's getting from the PTSD of being in those chambers, especially after Sister Location. Okay, so William makes Michael do FNAF 2, William makes Michael do FNAF 1, and then William's like, okay, fine, I'm going to do FNAF 1 myself, and I'll leave you out of those chambers for now. If I don't come back, here's what you need to do. Go into that bunker and do it for me. Here you go. And then William does follow me and dies and doesn't come back. So Michael is like, okay, I will do what my father asked me to and go down to the Sister Location bunker. Then Sister Location happens. And I think after Sister Location, Michael was like, all right, I don't trust William anymore. I need to get my revenge on him. He's the one doing all of this, especially, now it's not canon, but there's the ending you can get, the Ennard Night, where Michael veers off into the private room, opens that, sees the monitors that were showing the FNAF 4 experiments while surviving against Ennard. I know that ending isn't technically canon. The one where he gets scooped is. But we have no confirmation that Michael doesn't discover the FNAF 4 experiments while in the Sister Location bunker. So if he learned what was happening to him was directly William's fault and then is killed because of what William asked him to do, when he comes back after being scooped, of course his only goal is, I need to kill my father. That is the only thing I want to do. I see him, it's on sight. When I get my hands on him, like that's all he's thinking for the rest of his undead life, I guess. Now, here's the fun part. In the Silver Eyes, specifically in the fourth closet, William injects Carlton directly into the heart with Remnant, and it knocks him out. And while unconscious, he can see all of the missing child incident kids, and he helps them collect their memories, which in that like weird dream spiritscape are represented as drawings. And once they're all together, he informs them that William is the one who killed them. They turn on William, and then as they're leaving, and this is super important, as they're leaving, Michael, who in this game is like the stand-in for the in the book is the kid who takes possession of Golden Freddy, gives him the drawing they were collecting that was bringing all the MCI kids together again. He gives it to Carlton, and Carlton's like, no, this is a part of you. And Michael says, you'll need this or else you will die, or something like that. Like, you'll die without it. Take it. Give it back to me when you see me again, or something like that. I think this is as direct as the book can get, saying, hey, what they're doing in this spirit world is amassing remnant. They are collecting spiritual energy. These drawings aren't real drawings. They're in this weird spirit unconscious state. And it's their spirits interacting with remnant to get them all together in a strong enough way so they can collect their memories. And then Michael gives it to Carlton and specifically says, you won't survive without it. Meaning this remnant in some way can keep someone alive and allow them to interact with spirits. So then we go to sister location, where Michael is attacked with the scooper, a remnant injector, that specifically, there is a note that says trace amounts of remnant remain on the machine after use. So it's almost guaranteed that some remnant got into Michael's chest cavity where his heart is when he was attacked with the scooper. And then when Ennard leaves Michael's body, that remnant is still there, and that's how he's able to like rise and continue going about his day. He might even heal. There's a chance. Look, I love the character designs that fan artists give Michael, where he's like purple and covered in bandages and hiding the fact that he's like a corpse. I love that. There is a chance that's not canon, but instead, over time, he heals. He probably still looks sickly and gaunt and things, but he's probably not a corpse after like a year or so of being essentially a remnant person, right? It's like, ironically, it's what William Afton was trying to be, where William Afton accidentally becomes this remnant agony-infused beast that can't die, but he's like fused to the Springtrap shell. Meanwhile, Michael is kind of what William's goal was, an immortal remnant human, essentially. But this is when I specifically think the FNAF 4 gameplay begins. I think those nightmares stay. I think those nightmares stay with Michael for the rest of his life. But now that he's already got remnant inside of him and is more able to communicate with spirits, if the crying child spirit finds him while Michael is looking for William and tries to reach out to him, now we have the combination that I think gives us the FNAF 4 gameplay. So in Alone Together, we get specific information that when a spirit is like trying to communicate with you, you will receive memories that aren't yours and your dreams will be affected. I think the FNAF 4 gameplay is the combination of Michael's nightmares of the FNAF 4 experiments and the crying child's memories of the FNAF 4 experiments. And that combination is what we're seeing in FNAF 4, which is why the hospital stuff and the FNAF 1 stuff are in the same room. And I'll take it a step further. I think when the crying child is fully reaching out and really trying to get a hold of Michael is when night 5 of FNAF 4 happens, aka the Nightmare Fredbear night, where all the animatronics are eventually replaced with Nightmare Fredbear. Think about it, right? Think about it. I don't think the crying child is trying to scare Michael. I think Michael is having these guilt-ridden, nightmare, chamber-induced nightmares. And when the crying child reaches out to him, and it finally registers to Michael's subconscious that this is the crying child, he doesn't see his little brother. He sees the last thing he did to his little brother, put him into the jaws of Fredbear. It's that guilt, that remembrance that affects those nightmares. And I would go even one more step further because we see nightmare, right? Like not Nightmare Fredbear, nightmare. And I've said in the past, for various reasons that I won't get into now because it's a whole tangent, because we're not even to like what's next in the timeline yet. But I've said in the past that I believe that Shadow Bonnie and Shadow Freddy are agony reflections of Charlie and Cassidy, respectively. And I have a whole video on that. You can go watch that if you want the reasons. It's a stretch, kind of, but I think it makes a lot of sense. If that's true, and Cassidy and the Crying Child are two spirits within Golden Freddy, and they're reaching out to Michael Afton, first, the Crying Child gets through, and we get Nightmare Fredbear. And then it doesn't work, and Cassidy, maybe in trying to help, or maybe just also being there, gets through as well, and we have Nightmare, Shadow Freddy. I think that's really compelling. Anyway, that'll definitely be in the timeline, but like, this video is gonna be like 2 hours long when I make it. So yeah, I think the idea of a lot of this happening because William is manipulating everyone around him makes a lot of sense. So that being said, what have I changed my opinions on in making this timeline? I think the biggest example is the order of deaths, because one of the first videos, like I think like the first or second video in the timeline playlist is me arguing that the characters from the Dark Circus come from, or sorry. The characters from Freddy's, Fredbear's, and Sister Location, or specifically Circus Baby's Pizza World, come from characters that were played at Fall Fest, and like fan favorite characters were translated into animatronics. And this would be again before remnant experiments. So the Sister Location animatronics would have at this point just been animatronics, and maybe William modified them later on. And I thought that was really compelling. In that video, I make the case that Elizabeth could have died first, and there is a good way to argue for Elizabeth dying first, and I think that is very compelling. But in that setup, the Sister Location animatronics need to have been built before the Crying Child dies, right? Because the Sister Location animatronics have a very specific time that they are built. It is when Circus Baby's Pizza World opens, I'm talking so fast, I'm getting past myself. ADHD is going today. This is what happens when I don't have someone to talk and let me just like sit in silence for a second, is I go too fast and I lose myself. So the Sister Locations have a very specific thing. A lot of people are like, well, they were built and then used for remnant experiments. We have no clue what that timeline is. What we do know for sure is that the Sister Location animatronics were built for Circus Baby's Pizza World, but were never actually opened because Circus Baby's Pizza World closed right before they were about to have their grand opening. So they never saw the light of day, but they were built. And we know that at some point in the timeline after that, they were used for remnant experiments. That we have no direct information on the length between they're built but never opened and they're used for experiments. There's an unknowable gap there. So in the idea where Henry makes the Sister Location animatronics from the Fall Fest characters and then later William uses them, they would have had to have been made before the Crying Child dies, because that kind of sets a lot of things in motion. And if they're made before, and Elizabeth's death, right? I keep going past myself. Elizabeth's death is very specifically linked to Circus Baby's Pizza World being about to be opened. So if they are built before the Crying Child dies, Elizabeth had to have died first. And I think that makes sense as a timeline. But in going back over again, Circus Baby's Pizza World being the response to the backlash from Fredbear's after the death of the Crying Child makes a lot of sense. And then also, I really, really like William manipulating Henry with the death of Charlie. If that's true, then the correct order would be Crying Child, Charlotte Emily, Elizabeth Afton, Missing Child Incident. And I think that's more compelling overall. It's the thing I spent the first 10 minutes talking about in this podcast. So because of that, I already changed my mind on that. And I think that's the biggest mid timeline shift. I think that is the biggest one I've had so far. And then as far as like what's next, right? Like what's coming down in the timeline, I'm in a bit of like a stalling area because I think the timeline from FNAF 1, not chronologically, but games wise, from FNAF 1 to Ultimate Custom Night, I can make that timeline. You give me a week, I'll make a timeline like that. And then the timeline from Special Delivery Help Wanted to Security Breach Ruin and Help Wanted 2, like those collection of games, I can make a pretty good timeline within a couple weeks. Like that's pretty solid. The real challenge, I think, in making a Five Nights at Freddy's timeline right now is combining those first two in a way that's compelling and figuring out where the Mimic fits in between it. And that's like kind of the thread to stitch it together. That's the big challenge, in my opinion. So what is next for this timeline? One, tackling the books. The books are going to take, I think, like 4 videos worth to go through all of them. Because I just did the Silver Eyes video. I'm going to probably do a full video just on Fazbear Frights. And then I'm thinking I'll do a video on Tales from the Pizzaplex and the miscellaneous books. I'm not sure. So, because I don't think the miscellaneous books have enough meat to get their own video, but they need to be discussed. So the question is, which will have more to talk about, Fazbear Frights or Tales from the Pizzaplex? I'm not sure, so I'm probably just going to write both of those scripts, and whichever one is shorter, I'm going to stitch on the miscellaneous books, those being the security logbook, the cookbook, the Freddy files, stuff like that. So the books need to happen at some point so I can put them on the corkboard. Then we're going to have to corkboard out Help Wanted, Help Wanted 2, Security Breach, Ruin, and Special Delivery. Those are all going to need corkboard spots as well. And then once that's all done, the big question is then, okay, how do we connect these? Where do we put the Mimic? Those are the two big ones, right? We need to figure out where they go. I had been thinking, obviously, I've said this many times, I've been thinking that the Mimic is pretty early in the timeline, but I was never sure where. Because like the Mexis machine, which is pretty linked with the Mimic, they're both so aged. They are the oldest things in those rooms. And even Gregory is like, yeah, it's really old. We don't really know what it is. And then in the books, you have Edwin creating the Mimic, but like we don't have great evidence of Edwin existing in the games yet. So it's like, okay, did Edwin make it? Or is like Edwin a games character? Or did Henry make it? And if so, when? That's a big question. I had in the past messed around with the idea that Henry builds the Mimic during FNAF 6 as a way to maybe try to bring Charlie back. That's a decent idea. But I will admit, I think Game Theory had a really good thought on their most recent video. So this was Tom's first like hosted FNAF theory. Again, been doing theories forever. All of them happen. But in that theory, it was that the Mimic was part of the Fall Fest. And that might be the reason why Fall Fest burns, or at least it was present during the fire and then was put in storage up until Security Breach, or even Help Wanted for that matter. I think that is a really good idea. There's one main problem I have with it. If the Mimic was in the basement of the FNAF 6 pizzeria the whole time, and I think that is true. I think it was in there for at least before, like at least during FNAF 6, the Mimic is down there. I think that makes a lot of sense because how else would it have gotten there, right? So if that's true, there's always this weird timing thing with the FNAF 6 pizzeria and Security Breach, where when they dig into there, they specifically dig into there during the events of Security Breach, which takes place after Help Wanted. So whatever forms Glitch Trap can't come from that basement. Because that would be the chicken coming before the egg, right? Because Freddy and Vanessa are the ones that go down there to dig into the FNAF 6 pizzeria, and at that point, Glitch Trap has already controlled the minds of Vanessa and Freddy. So if Glitch Trap is the one making them dig, Glitch Trap can't be digging out the thing that formed Glitch Trap. Now, counterpoint, the books say that the Mimic was delivered to the Security Breach Pizzaplex, specifically to the FNAF 6 underground Pizzaplex while they're clearing it out. I have some issues with that because the way the books describe the FNAF 6 pizzeria don't line up super well with the way it's presented in Security Breach. all of the evidence we have in the game of Security Breach suggests that nobody who works at the Pizzaplex knows about the FNAF 6 pizzeria. It's something they're actively discovering. And they're like, hey, we keep getting weird sinkholes and like losing power. I'm going to start digging here. And then presumably they're fired or killed off or something like that, because it's all like, oh, we'll dig there in the morning after we go do an all-staff meeting and stuff like that. So in the books, it definitely seems like they know about the FNAF 6 pizzeria, because they're like cleaning it up. There's kids sneaking into there. So it's like more accessible in a way. They were planning to make it a museum, I think. Whereas in the games, it's like not knowledge to anyone who's not in the know. Vanessa, Glitchtrap, people like that. So that's something that doesn't line up super well. And then you look at the Mimic being trapped in the basement. And I think it does make a lot of sense for GGY and Vanny, or Gregory and Vanessa, when they're under the control of Glitchtrap, to be the ones who trapped it there. But if they trapped it there, was it already there? Like, it gets very confusing. But I do like the idea of the Mimic being at Fall Fest and possibly even being the reason it burned. So that's a great point, and I'll probably be adding that to the timeline. I like that a lot. So that's about where the timeline's at. Is the big step is finish the books, do the new games, and then figure out how to transition those two sections of the timeline. But I've yapped enough. I've been yapping for like 35 minutes. Let's take some questions. And I got a lot of Spotify questions today because I was going through them and I realized I missed a bunch. And not all Spotify, but I'll point it out when we get to them. But if you want your questions answered on the podcast, feel free to send them to Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. Or alternatively, you can do the Q&A feature on Spotify. It's right there. I don't know if iTunes or Amazon has similar features, so you guys might just want to do the email. That email is in the description to copy and paste because it's pain to type out. Our first question comes from Jay, they, them. Do you think it's possible Gregory's soul was not in Balloon World like the main consensus seems to be? GGY goes by Dr. Rabbit, and there is an arcade cabinet called Mad Science with Dr. Scraptrap. Coincidentally, a game you cannot play or beat, which would leave Balloon World, the game you play during Security Breach, to possibly contain another person's soul, who just so happens to wake up in Help Wanted 2 during and after Security Breach. That's a really good point. So it's one of those theories that I think that's a great thought experiment, and I don't think there's any solid arguments against it. My main argument would be it really seems likely that the daycare alcove, the loft, I think it was called in Help Wanted 2, it seems very, very likely that the daycare loft was the Gregory den, or the GGY den, right? We have above Fazer Blast is the Vanny den, and this would be GGY's den. And I think Balloon World being in there is already such strong evidence for that connection. After all, Princess Quest was in the Vanny den. And then I think if Mad Science with Dr. Scraptrap was that important, there would have been some kind of nod to it. So I don't have solid evidence to be like, no, you're wrong. I just have circumstantial evidence that leads me away from that theory. So that's a perfectly valid theory. I can't think of any that's wrong, but I do think there are better arguments for Balloon World than Mad Science with Dr. Scraptrap. But it's an interesting point. So thank you for your question. Our next question comes from Hazazel from Spotify. People say, though I can't remember where I heard this, the indie dev made 4 games. Which 4 make the most sense in universe? More of a fun brain teaser than a necessarily accurate. Thank you for your question. And I think this is less of me speculating. I'm just going to clarify, because I think there is an accurate answer for this, and it's the first 4 FNAF games. So where you heard it was in the story Help Wanted, where Steve Snodgrass, I think it is the author or the indie dev who's making games for Fazbear. He makes FNAF 1, FNAF 2, FNAF 3, and he is partway through FNAF 4 when he's killed. So that's where the 4 games idea come from. And then you look at Help Wanted, the game, and we have by name Five Nights at Freddy's 1, Five Nights at Freddy's 2, Five Nights at Freddy's 3, and then we have Dark Rooms, which is a collection of parts of FNAF 4. So I will say that's pretty goddamn 1-to-1 of an idea of if there were 3.5 games made, this lines up perfectly. Now, the other issue is Help Wanted itself is implying that every previous FNAF game was an in-game in-universe game, because there are references in Help Wanted to Sister Location and to FNAF 6. So Help Wanted seems to be arguing that every game before it, except possibly FNAF World and Ultimate Custom Night, are indie games, like FNAF 1, 2, 3, 4, Sister Location, and 6. Like those 6 core games are in-universe games, is what Help Wanted seems to be implying with the things it includes, right? Because Ennard is there. And if Sister Location is not an in-universe game, Ennard should not and is not public knowledge, right? And then there's the Scrap Babies, which look pretty identical to to Scrap Baby in a plushie form. So the Scrap Baby plushies, if they look really similar to how Scrap Baby looks in FNAF 6, implies that that design is public knowledge, which would then imply Scrap Baby, something that shouldn't be public knowledge, is, right? And then Security Breach doubles down on this, because we have the Ennard photo opportunity, where you go in the face of something that looks like Ennard. So if Ennard is a character, which it should not be, Sister Location kind of has to be an in-universe game. And at that point, so does FNAF 6, which makes things very confusing. But I think genuinely all that it changes is that if I've said this 1,000 times, I genuinely think the only thing that Help Wanted retcon is clarifying is saying, hey, if a new game directly contradicts something from an earlier game, trust the new game first, because we're trying to course correct and make a compelling story based off of games that were made very quickly a long time ago. I think that's kind of what's happening. So I hope that answers your questions, Hazazel. And our last question comes from Quinn, also from Spotify. This is kind of a fun one to cap it off. Who do you consider the animatronic with the most amount of lore stuff? Like, has the most lore implications and is important for the lore? So you can take this in a couple ways. If you take this question as like, who do you think, what animatronic is most important to the story of Five Nights at Freddy's? I think it has to be Spring Bonnie and therefore Springtrap, right? It's literally the main villain and the driving force for 90% of the paranormal stuff that happens in these games. So if you're talking about like who is most important, Spring Bonnie. But I think it's more interesting of a question to say, and this might be what you're trying to get at, which animatronic has the most like weird lore stuff and is like the most debated topic in all of Five Nights at Freddy's? Because first instinct, I say Golden Freddy, which I think is a good contender. And it's pretty fitting that the most important and the most debated animatronics are the duo of Fredbear and Spring Bonnie. Like that's really funny to me. But like there's Golden Duo, it's not even clear who's in Golden Freddy or how many people are possessing Golden Freddy. You know, the whole idea of like it's me and who's possessing it in the books and the movie. I think Golden Freddy is a great contender for the most debated animatronic. However, there is a new answer to this that I think is also valid, that being the Mimic. The idea that the Mimic is the thing that is most debated about isn't a bad idea, like especially because it's modern, and I understand that like most people are going to debate about the modern stuff, but the Mimic has so many implications and we have so little information on it. So I would say most important Spring Bonnie, most debated either Golden Freddy or the Mimic. I think that's my clear answer on that. But thank you for your question, Quinn. And that was so fast. We kind of speed rounded those, but my throat's dying because I'm trying to project for this whole podcast. So I think I just need a vocal break anyway. So we're going to call it there. But again, thank you all for your questions. If you have questions to answer on the podcast, send it to Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast @gmail.com or answer them on Spotify. But until next time, thank you for watching the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast, where the pizza abilities are endless. We hope to enjoy your future patronage. Bye-bye for now.